You guys missed all the excitement about the Geneva Road property. Mike was there last night.
Well, that happened to us a month ago.
Oh, there's.
You know that.
Okay.
Well, yeah, you guys started, you started all this.
How are you?
Just kept going.
Turned down.
Oh, we were good? Okay. Then we'll go ahead.
It was a piece of our.
We'll go ahead and call it to order. We can get going.
They're going to discuss how that.
There we go. So our one, oh. Love that.
So we can work out.
Yes.
Jim?
Cool.
Surprised to see you here.
So our one item is the Leaky subdivision. It is about 875 east, 1450 south, is in the R 7.5 zone. Here it is on the vicinity map. As you can see, it's one large lot and they are wanting to split it into two lots. Neither of them will be a deep lot though, because the lot has frontage on two streets. So they're wanting to just.
It has what, sorry?
Frontage on two streets,
Oh,
both on
okay.
1400
Yes.
south and on 1450 south. And so they are wanting to split it into two. The existing house will remain. And the lots are plenty large enough to be compliant with the zone. The zone only requires 7,500 square feet. And lot one is about 12,000 square feet and lot two is about 15,000.
Oh.
So they're still very large lots.
It's a nice lot.
Hey, that's
Nice.
We drove by it.
We have the preliminary and the final plat. Here's the final plat. And here's what it looks like from the street right now, from both 1450 south and 1400 south. And staff recommends approval. Questions, thoughts?
I'm just curious, do we know why they drew the back line? The angle they did?
Yes, so you can't see it super well, but the lots to either side that already had lines, they just connected the 2 points. So this
Okay.
lot starts here, this lot goes in here, so they just connect the dots.
Yeah, I thought that was.
Yeah,
It is kind of a funky.
just make sure they're mowing and all that other stuff awkward stuff.
Keep
I
you on
was
your
just
toes
curious
while
why.
you're
And so the lot that doesn't have the house on it is bigger than the one that does?
No, it's smaller.
It's lot one is the one that doesn't have a house.
Okay.
So
The
it's
one
about
they used to
3,000.
store their boat on.
Okay, any other questions?
Pretty straightforward.
Well, that's all I have.
No, we're gonna have training. We're gonna continue on with some of the training from Gary. That is, we're gonna keep it all to the 1K.
Help us to become lawyers here.
Yeah.
So what did you ask for?
I want us.
No,
we're gonna
that's-
become lawyers.
3 years of hazing that you don't gonna walk out. Need to go through. That's all it is.
My brother was really.
It's like getting into school. It's just a bunch of putting up with bureaucrats and academics as you do the work.
Yeah.
Where did you go to law school?
Case Western.
Case Western, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a whole series of, it's just hazing, that's all it is.
Terry, do you have some slides of Europe that you could show us?
What's that?
Do you have any pictures of Europe that you
You know,
can share?
Paris and.
Yeah, I played my vacation flight.
I'll show my pictures from Rotterdam and we can discuss public transportation in those two.
Yeah. Okay.
It's probably all of them in mine.
So Jim, I think we had 25 people last night. 25 people came and spoke about the Geneva Road and gas station.
Remember that gas station?
I do.
Good for them.
So there was this crowd that was here before and
Yeah.
And a few more
How did you vote?
unanimous.
Yeah. Turnout.
Sure it was.
That was the audience.
People like it.
Couple of crimes.
How long did you practice law?
The legal market. Yeah, the bar. Legal market, taking the worst jobs because we have two major universities, legal hiring.
You just stay a visit, Jim?
And
Yeah.
so
Not doing anything good.
finally find a really good job.
Looks like you're busy. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, what you do tonight?
Not that tomorrow.
Oh, with extortion.
So
Hey,
basically.
you enjoying it?
Yeah.
Is it the same people?
Oh, it's different people who first brought up the story.
Yeah.
Not the same one.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
So you've got typically 3 or 4 of them. So same bunch of.
it's 4 or 5,
Other.
yeah, usually.
But you done the bars.
Avoid it.
Yeah, I can still practice. I'm inactive right
Stronger
now.
word.
I just have to pay my
Not at all.
fee.
Definitely one.
It's basically.
You stop
avoid
coming.
CLEs.
Then you know, like your
Well,
CLA.
with the rest.
And then you'll-
Yeah, well, I don't know if you
So then if I'm not.
didn't like, because you got extra ribbing being.
It was still.
Well, because they're away, so what do you think you're gonna screen requirements for people? Yeah, so, you know, there is some accountability being incumbent.
Stop share.
But probably not over time. Yeah,
I think I just got it out.
it's not that, I don't know, just drawing is in presentation, but talking is so much.
It's good job. Good job. So,
That's what I like. As far as overall knowledge, capability for your is probably the most talented capable person. Who knows the law, the ordinances and everything that we're.
regular night.
And then it should go.
Yeah, it's part of the
Okay,
Just make sure we're in the middle of the meeting, guys.
so where did we get to? Does anybody remember? Past this,
I wasn't
Oh,
here.
yeah.
Can we start over again? Just
Yeah,
kidding. Just
bring
kidding.
it over here.
Just kidding.
I
No,
think
no.
I saw it, I thought it said the end as far as we got.
I was totally kidding.
I think that's just wishful thinking on your part.
Maybe I was dreaming that.
Was there any questions from what we talked about last time? It's pretty high level, pretty quick. And we're talking about different things, mostly got into administrative items and legislative items that come to the planning commission. And I cannot remember, I forgot to write down where we were.
That's okay.
We talked about that.
We talked about this, okay,
Let me ask
Accepting,
you,
you know, the input of the people.
yeah.
Not basing the emotion on you making that your decision.
Yeah, so I think this is about where we left off, dealing with administrative. And so when you're in the administrative context, remember your discretion or the ability to make a decision is very narrow and confined about the standards by which you can turn a project down or conditions that could be on a project or how you can go about it. So one of the big things, and this is something that comes up in case law a lot, is talking about public clamor. In administrative decisions, you can't have public clamor. And remember, we have the traffic cop hat, because when we're in administrative mode, we're really in determining, does it comply with code? Then approve. If it doesn't comply with code, no, then deny. whether we like it or not. And so public clamor, we always joke, proud member of the angry mob. Oftentimes on an administrative item, you'll have people from the public who will come in and talk about something. And they'll talk about how they feel about the project, whether they think the project's a good idea or not. But those are not a basis on which we can turn a project down. Because in the administrative context, it's really, does it comply with code? If it does, we have to approve it, regardless of whether we think it's a great project or a bad one. And so oftentimes people will come in and they'll talk, and it can be frustrating, especially when we hold a public hearing on an administrative item and somebody talks, and what they talk about has nothing to do with the criteria upon which you can make your decision. And so, oftentimes the things that someone from the public wants to say will not deal with how this project complies or does not comply with code. And that's the basis on which you need to judge it.
Why do we hold public meetings on administrative items?
That's a really good question,
Because
but a lot of communities do this. You have to hold, and we'll get into this a little later, there's a slide on, but it's a little bit of a preview to open public meetings. So every meeting you have is a public meeting. So this meeting is a public meeting. And we're live streaming it, it's being recorded. And the public can come here and watch and participate. But this meeting and this item that you have in front of you right now is not a public hearing. I don't finish, and then the chair says, okay, we'd like to open this up for public comment. Does somebody from the public want to make a comment about how well Gary can present or how poorly he presents? And so despite how much they want to talk about how poorly I've done, it's not, we don't have to have a public hearing under state law. Sometimes though, municipalities will end up having a requirement to hold a public hearing on a purely administrative item. Now, what that can do is really cause frustration for almost everybody in the room. It can cause frustration for the public because they think if it's a public hearing and I'm here and I'm talking to you and telling you what my point of view is, and then you make a decision, I'm telling you, I don't think this is a good project. Orem has too many of these types of projects, but it's an administrative item.
Talk about car washes.
But let's say if it's a car wash, if it's literally, we're just approving a project plan, and it's in a zone that allows car washes, it's a permitted use, we can't say no to it because it legally meets all of the requirements of our code, of state law. And let's say neighbors come in and we hold a hearing and they say, hey, we hate car washes and we don't like them. We have too many. Orem is now the capital of car washes. We don't like this type of thing. Well, that's not a legitimate basis for the planning commission to turn down the project. And so the public sits down and then you approve the project unanimously, and they're frustrated and angry after the meeting because you didn't listen to us. And so that's one thing that the planning commission and staff, we as we've talked about using this meeting to investigate items and issues that are important to the city, is we can talk about when we have a public hearing and when we should not have a public hearing on administrative items. Because can that reduce conflict? Can that reduce some of the angst that people can feel over something? Whereas as we go, so public clamor, this comes from case law, this little quote up here. Is citizen opposition is a consideration which must be weighed, but it can't be the sole basis for the decision to deny an application. So you can listen to it, understand it, but you can't use it as the basis to turn down an application that comes in front of you if that application meets with all of the other code requirements that you have. And so now let's talk about public clamor in the legislative context. And it's a really different approach, and it means a lot different, and actually it's not public clamor. So the first question is, when you're making recommendations ultimately to the municipal council, and really it's the municipal council, since the planning commission is a recommending body, you're going to be making these recommendations to the council. And again, we have the construction hat here to remind us that in the legislative context, we're building something. We're going to construct what the laws of Orem are, what the policy of Orem City is going to be. And so what kind of discretions do we have to make a decision like that? Okay. And it's very wide. Remember, administrative was very narrow. It's really constrained to what the ordinances are in front of you. Legislative, it's very wide. And the question is it fairly debatable? So whatever the policy consideration we have at the end, like a rezone, should this zone be a residential zone? Should it be a commercial zone? Should it be an agricultural type zone? What type of zone should it be? It's fairly debatable. There can be a lot of disagreement about that policy. But as long as it's rational and debatable, what people think is important. So this public sentiment's really important. Now when people come in and say, hey, using the examples of the car washes just only, we have too many car washes. Oh, okay. Because we're not looking at the issue of does the underlying zone allow a car wash or not? It's now, should we even have car washes in this zone? Or should we expand it into other zones? And so as we're doing that, that public sentiment is really important. And so now kind of gives you an idea of, to wrap your arms around that, the discretion and the public sentiment. This comes from another court case, Supreme Court case in Utah. If an ordinance could promote the general welfare, or even if it's reasonably debatable, that is in the interest of the general welfare, we will uphold the decision of the municipal council. So the municipal council has a lot of authority, and this is how the system is designed to make these types of policy decisions for your community. Have any of you ever been to a place called, what is it? Oh shoot, my mind just went blank. Up in the mountains of, Cascade Mountains of the state of Washington.
Not in Oregon, but in Washington.
Washington State. Oh shoot.
No, that's on the other side of the state. You're talking on the east side of the state, aren't you?
Well, kind of when you hit the Cascades
Yeah.
and start going into it,
Yeah.
from the west side the east side
Yeah,
going
going
down into Seattle and all that stuff.
Issaquah, you're talking the last mountain range of Washington State.
Yeah, as you come in, I want to see.
So I-90.
Yes. And as you drop in, if you had fallen asleep in your car,
Yeah.
and then woke up when you came, you would have thought you were in a German Bavarian village in 1880.
Well, you're talking another part of Washington.
I know where
It's called, it's a German name.
Yeah,
I've been there. It's near The Apple place, what's that called?
I know, it's on the tip of my tongue anyways.
Oh my gosh, is it Leavenworth?
Leavenworth,
Oh, I get a prize for that, right?
yes, you do.
Easy to remember.
Well, see, Leavenworth threw it through my mind and I'm thinking for Leavenworth prison, that can't be. But is that whole town has extremely strict design standards. And if you build anything new, it's got to look like 1880s Bavarian village.
In fact, it has to have the approval of the German president.
What?
You go to this place, it is unbelievable, isn't it? I mean,
Absolutely unbelievable.
you think you're in Germany, you really would.
Yeah, and you go to a McDonald's there. It doesn't look like any McDonald's you've ever seen
No.
anywhere, because the discretion that the council has to be able to create policy for their community, for the general welfare, for the economic benefit. And it's a very touristy place. Apparently they need to come up with a better name that you can remember. But, or it's just me, probably. But that's the type of, and then you go to a place like that and then look at the design standards that you see along the Wasatch Front here in Utah. Not nearly as strict, hardly at all.
Park City, I believe, has some of those.
Yeah, but Park City has, is
Not
a
to the
little
extent.
more that way.
Yeah.
So that shows you this wide discretion that you have. And so this, in the legislative context, what was the angry mob is really just all of our friends and neighbors coming in and giving us input on how we should create Orem, what it should look like, what the policy should be. And so it's a very different dynamic and context. And then, so in legislative, the planning commission, as you stand here at the top of the mountain, you have staff, you have applicants, you have neighbors, you have business concerns, you have environmental groups, you have people coming in, all from their perspective on the policy hill of what should we do, making recommendations to you. And then you make a recommendation ultimately to the municipal council. And then there's another, if there's a training with the municipal council, there's another hill comes on and it shows them, they're now at the top of the planning commission is another group making recommendations. So on legislative items, staff will make a recommendation to you. And our recommendation and your response to it just needs to be fairly debatable. And we'll bring you a perspective. We think it's an important perspective, but there are many perspectives on legislative items that can be taken into account of how we're going to do things and why we should do things and the reasoning behind it. And then ultimately that gets kicked up to the council for a decision. Yeah.
So it separates an administrative item from a legislative item as whether it goes to council or not?
Not necessarily. In some communities with a strong mayor form of government, you know, and that would be what, Salt Lake, Provo, Sandy, I believe. It's where it's really the separations of power. It's just like, you know, the state government, you've got the governor and the legislature. And the governor is the executive or the administers the laws, and the legislative approves the law or creates the law and makes it. Where you have a council manager form of government, some of the things that are administrative approvals do go to the city council. And so for approval. And in those contexts, if it's an administrative item and it goes to the city council for approval, the city council has those same constraints. And an administrative item that goes to the city council, the council will have narrow discretion upon which to make a decision or to approve or deny a project. Legislative, it's again, much more broad.
And in Orem thus far, I think the majority of what we dealt with that goes to city council has been legislative. I don't think we've had any applicants. in Orem.
Conditional uses are,
Oh,
Okay,
yeah, so we've got a couple of those, but.
Yeah, so like a conditional use, that will go and it's set up that way. Now, again, that's something, it doesn't have to be that way. It could be, the municipal council could set it up so that planning commission or another body would decide conditional uses. Now, in administrative context, there's some judgment. It's not 100% black and white. The easy one is like a setback on a project. Let's say the side yard setback typically needs to be what, 10 feet? Around 10 feet usually. And when you're looking at the plan, is the setback 10 feet? If it is, it complies with that code. There's really no question or hesitation. If it's 9 feet, it doesn't comply. And, staff will say, hey, that doesn't comply. But on a conditional use permit, it might be, what are some of the deleterious impacts that this project might have on the neighboring community? And then there's a little bit more of kind of a judgment and weighing of that. But it's still administrative and you've got to make findings and things with it. So in this administrative context, it's now we're talking about if I'm the applicant and it's an administrative project that's coming in front of planning commission, what is my legal expectation? Under the law, what can I expect? And it's that I have a vested right. That I make an application, I pay all my fees, it's a complete application. I have a vested right. It's kind of like you start working somewhere and you have a 401k that vests after a period of time. And what that means is once it's vested, it's yours, it's your right and nobody can take it away from you. And
So the vested right in this instance would be the ability to make the application, is that correct?
well, their vested right would be that once they've made a complete application and paid the fees, that their project will be judged against the code that exists. Okay. Now, Utah admittedly has a very, compared to the rest of the country, has a very early vested right. Now, for instance, in California, your vested right doesn't attach until you have made substantial progress on your project. And there's a lot of case law and things over what that means. But so you may actually make an application in California and everybody looks at it and goes, oh, wow, we didn't realize under this administrative scheme, you could really do it and do it this way. They've just made application. They really haven't done, there's no grading, there's nothing going on like that. And they'll change the rules on it. In Utah, you can't do that. It's at the time of your application, you pay your fee, it's a complete application. What's the code? And that's your legal expectation. And so it's, if my application or this request, it complies with law, it's going to be approved. And there are some instances, but they're extremely rare, if there's a countervailing public interest, or this is a big one, there's pending legislation. So the laws exist as they do right now today, but before the applicant made their application, there's an actual pending legislation, an item that would change an application to change the code or the zoning map or something like that, that would affect this project. So let's say you're dealing with some sort of standards in commercial developments. And you've got an ordinance and it could really change the rules on that. And an application's made for that, and then somebody says, oh man, this could really change what I'd like to do. And the next day they hurry and run in and make an application in the city. Well, even though the pending legislation is not law yet, under state law, you have an opportunity as a city to complete that process, and it may affect the applicant's application. Okay.
So I kind of had heard something around grandfathering, and it's kind of, what I understood is when the application gets filed as compared to when the pending legislation gets filed, and there is a date. I've heard about grandfathering. Is that something that's applicable here or not?
It's a similar concept. So if I come in with my complete application today, and then Michaela goes, oh boy, there's a problem, we really ought to change, it technically complies with our code. I remember one time I had a developer come in and he had a project and it technically complied with our code. This was when I worked at Prova, it complied with the code, but it was really dumb. And the developer came in and I said, this is really dumb. And he goes, I know. He goes, but for a myriad of reasons, I needed to do that. And so we saw that application like, yeah, technically it complies with our code, but kind of didn't think through this consequence of our ordinance scheme. And so if we went out the next day and made an application to change the code, to close that loophole, the applicant's application could still be vested because the pending legislation came subsequent. Okay. And so, again, from case law, a land use authority shall apply the plain language of the land use regulations. We have to apply that. And so that's their expectation. Now let's switch it to the legislative context. Again, we're in the process of creating the law. So what's their expectation? Their legal expectation? It's kind of a trick question. None. They have no legal expectation. The law, what they're coming in is really, in a very real sense, coming to the Planning Commission saying, Planning Commission, I know you've got all your ordinances and laws set up like this, but I can't do my project under the laws as they exist. So I want you to change the law so that I can build the project I want to build. Okay? And they don't have a vested right or an expectation that a law will be changed to benefit them. Now, there may be some very rare exceptions to that if we had certain ordinances in place that created that expectation that the code wouldn't change. But that would be exceedingly rare. So really, they have no expectation. And one of the things that came in, so no legal expectation, no vested right. And so now, because of that, let's see what would be the good one. Oh yeah, with council meeting last night on 2000 South Geneva Road was the Holiday Oil. They couldn't come in and just build or build their project. They needed the law changed because it was in a zone that would not allow them to do what they wanted to do. So they had to come in and request a legislative change, a new project, and it went to the municipal council. and it got turned down. There's no expectation. How are we doing on time?
Another 10 minutes or so.
Oh, okay. So now, with administrative, again, the policy question, what's the policy question that we're dealing with? Well, it's kind of a trick way. There's really no policy question. It's what does the code say? It's just what does the code say? And does this application comply? And municipal zoning authorities are bound by the terms and standards of their zoning, applicable zoning ordinances, and are not at liberty to make land use decisions and derogation thereof. So we have to comply with what our code says.
Where would that create heartburn for the planning commission? What would be an example of that? Where maybe we even though we were doing an administrative item, but we think, oh, this is not. So water.
Maybe a site plan.
Like a site plan, maybe a car wash, you think we have too many and you just don't want another one, and they don't like the layout, you don't, I mean, something like that would be, and you wanna vote against it, that, based on ordinances and rules, you can't.
So if the people that had come and asked for the women's shelter had not wanted to rezone from C3 to C2, and they just wanted to put something in there that was already C3, we would have had to approve it.
So the site plan would have come in, and they could have come in and said, we don't want this here, type of thing.
And we'll keep the C3 and C2 exactly the way they were, even though they were
Right,
not.
and then, then it would be up to the planning commission to approve it, as long as they met all the requirements of the C3 zone, regardless of whether you like the project or not like the project. I can't think of one right now that had a lot of consternation to it, but there have been in the past, but people just have come out and really, they didn't like the project, they don't want that number of lots. They don't-
So let me use another example. About 4 or 5 years ago, developers bought up a whole bunch of houses where the green is today, and they took them down and started planning a high density development before development occurred. That was a legislative thing, because they wanted to rezone to a high
The
density.
rezone process was
So that was
legislative,
legislative, that was not administrative.
but there was administrative when they came in to get a demo permit, that's administrative. So, and the planning commission really has nothing to do with that either. So they can tear down you can tear down your house without getting approval from the city, other than a demolition permit. That doesn't go into any other body other than the building department to make sure that you comply with the state requirements. So anybody can tear their house down. Now, the legislative portion, would they ever get the green approved? That was the question. And that was the process they went through. They kind of tore them down first. But they could do that without having any approval from the city, other than a demo.
Question?
Yes, because the city is dealing with this right now, but I don't understand how it works. So that Middle Gold property right here had an application on it that was not completed. And they knew there was a moratorium going on the next day, so they hurried in order to get the application put in before the moratorium goes in effect. How does that fall? How does the moratorium fall in the pending code change? I mean, if they knew it's going to happen the next day, so they heard about the application. The application was not paid for, my understanding.
It was.
It was, okay.
But was it legislative or administrative, their application?
So the moratorium was, I guess, legislative act.
No, but the application, would their application was administrative?
Administrative, the application was administrative, so the application was complete, but they knew, everybody knew that there was a moratorium going the next day, so the application happened right before that, the day before. No, so correct me, I don't know, we corrected.
Yeah, it was, they had the application. They had their neighborhood meeting the next day. That was the last thing.
Okay, but if they knew the moratorium was going in, how would that fall with that application? Would it be, is a moratorium, it's just a placeholder, it's not actually a change of.
Yeah, and you could put moratoriums on. State law allows a municipality to put a moratorium on to allow them to go in and do more planning or something like that, called kind of
Fact finding, yeah.
Yeah, and there's usually a time limit on it, what is it, 6 months?
Yeah.
And then some municipalities And frankly, I don't know if Orem has one, because I haven't had a chance to look for this yet, have their own vested rights ordinance and they can do that as long as it doesn't conflict with state law or is preempted by state law. But if you put a moratorium on, usually what happens is you can put on a moratorium. And people may know it's coming, but if it's not on an agenda and publicly noticed, even though people know it's probably going to be coming and that's talk, it doesn't count. It would not interfere with a vested right.
Was this one on an agenda and was publicly noticed?
So,
What was that? Sorry.
Was the moratorium on an agenda and publicly noticed or not?
Yeah, it was.
It was.
this one's still pending litigation, so we might not want.
Yeah, you guys may not
We might
really
not
talk
be-
about
be
it.
Well,
talking
because
about
tomorrow they have
whether
a
that's
public
or not.
meeting, they have that
The
same,
neighborhood meeting.
they have a neighborhood meeting tomorrow to tell the neighbors what kind of property they're gonna apply for, what kind of building.
Yeah.
Change.
Yeah, and so what we're talking about here is how these things work. It's just kind of a high level general principles. And an individual case where there's been, litigation going on, clearly they disagree with.
Well, in this particular instance, you may not be aware of what occurred here, the Springville citizens versus Springville. You know enough about this particular situation as.
Yeah, if I remember right, in Springville Citizens, they had a process. And I think the process is that they required a traffic study of something on a certain type of administrative project. And the city came in and actually ended up approving the project. And Springville Citizens for a Better Springville or something like that, actually sued Springville and said, hey, you can't do that. You have to require, your ordinance says you shall have a traffic study. There's no discretion. Shall is mandatory, and you didn't require a traffic study. I think that's what it was. And the court came back and said, yeah, Springville, if you say you have to have a traffic study, you better have a traffic study.
Follow your own rules.
You have to follow your own rules. If you don't want a traffic study to be mandatory, you want to leave some discretion, then you can say, you change your code. But whatever you decide you need to do, then you better follow it and do it. Okay. Let's see. Okay, so with legislation.
Oh, they do a traffic study for City Hall here? Just curious.
Is it might be
Might not
mandatory?
be mandatory.
That I don't know, but as we go through some of these things, what could be helpful for the planning commission in the future is to take, I don't necessarily know, with the Meadow Gold and something that has litigation on it. But if we wanted to really dive down into and look at timeframes and how pending legislation really works, that could be a good thing to do, because as projects, especially an administrative project, comes in front of you, one of the things that I would suggest is as you approve projects over time, that you approve a project and then once it gets built or as they come online, we probably ought to review those projects. Did they turn out the way we wanted them to and the way we thought they would under our existing code? And if they didn't, then why not? Why did the code not give us the result that we want? Because where the planning commission can really spend time is on those legislative items, these policy questions, not the actual individual code. I remember giving training to neighborhood groups years ago when someone had been a chair of a neighborhood group. And as I went through this, she turned to me and actually with quite a lot of emotion in her voice said, you mean all those times on these administrative projects that I was fighting and lobbying and calling and doing things, I was wasting my time.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, if it complied with code, that's exactly right. She said, I should have been spending more time advocating for changes in our code rather than fighting these individual projects. And it was like, yeah, that's right. Because that's where the planning comes in. The planning commission should be spending a lot of their time on planning issues. And the policy questions of those planning issues are, well, what should a property be zoned? How should we have the zones in the city? Well, what should the law be? What should those underlying zoning, if it's in a residential zone, okay, what should the requirements in that residential zone be?
But wouldn't that be a common misconception that the public has?
Yes, very
I
common.
mean, that's, by the time they understand how things are decided, they've gone through the wrong door. You know,
Frequently.
They're too late.
That can be and it creates frustration, especially when we're holding those public hearings where we have to open it up and say, okay, anybody here who wants to comment on this, come up and comment on it. And in my experience, if it's an administrative item and we allow public comment, 95+% of the comments are frankly irrelevant to what your decision is going to be. But bless the heart of those people who take the time and effort to come down and make that comment. They think because we're allowing them to do that, that
Their voices will be heard, but they're really not. I mean,
yeah, and it's not satisfying to
right, no one wins.
nobody wants to hear, especially in this area, your cause is just, but I can do nothing for
That's
you.
right.
You know, that's not a very satisfying response. How am I doing on time? I'm sorry.
Okay.
We just let them finish their questions and then wrap up.
Okay.
So, I mean, for a long time, I've wanted to put forward something that says, and some other municipalities, places do this around America, which is, in order to build something in a neighborhood, you need to get neighborhood approval, not just notification, approval before you go to the city. That would be the type of a thing we could put forward, correct? As a legislative.
That's a very dangerous.
I understand, no, you don't have to, don't talk about the merits of it, but that is something we could put forward.
Well, I mean, legally.
Yeah,
Legally, I mean, it's dangerous.
I understand.
So that is something that could be proposed as a
Other
legislative body.
municipalities have done that,
Yes.
okay.
Utah law is a little different than a lot of areas around the country. Utah's very much more private property and landlord, and frankly, the most protected piece of property is not your home. This is my own little soapbox, is a billboard under state law. As billboards have more legal protections than your home does. Just kind of a little FYI.
So we need to,
That would be one we would really need to get in and look closely at how we did it.
Maybe a cell tower.
To give unelected officials veto power over a legislative
no, it wouldn't be,
policy.
it would be before they do their application, not, it wouldn't be a veto. It would be
Well, like-
prior to applying.
Kind of like the neighborhood.
Right.
Yes, and I understand what you're saying, but saying you can't even petition your government unless you have the approval of your neighbors could be very problematic, and we'd have to really look at that. But see, an issue like that is something that planning commission could take time to plan and study.
Awesome. So could a developer have a public meeting like they're having tomorrow, even though the property in question is still in litigation?
Yeah, a developer, somebody, I could go and organize a public meeting anytime, anywhere, you know, just because I want to.
Great.
Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, and then next time we do it, what, I'll make a note of where we
Which
are.
slide we're on?
Which slide number we're on, and we'll keep going. Is that okay?
Yeah, that was great, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, we'll convene in the room for our
I thought the other was
meeting.
at 4:45.
So, no, we're still having our meeting 4:30 in there to do the one item that's on our agenda. And then we'll come back in here and start the transportation master plans meeting at 4:45.
It's a separate meeting.
Yeah, it's its own entity.
I'll take one guy who can sell those.
Yeah. I haven't had.
They are, they're very
3 years.
Yeah, that's why we didn't say it.
I can't say the same for chocolate, sugar, or any other fatty, greasy meat.
I can adjust it. I do that. So,
Testing. We're going to call the meeting to order and begin. Mike, you're right there next to me. Has the invocation.
Our Father in heaven, we thank you for the opportunity to gather as a planning commission. We ask thy hand be upon this meeting, that we make mindful and proper decisions in the best interest of the city and the people within it. We thank you for all the benefits and the blessings that we receive being in this great city and in this nation. Say these things humbly in the name of thy son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. We'll begin with item 3.1.
Awesome. Item 3.1 is the Lukey subdivision, Plat A. This is a preliminary plat approving the Lukey subdivision, Plat A, located generally at 875 East, 1450 South in the R7.5 zone. Here's the vicinity map. As you can see, the lot is currently just one large lot. The applicant is requesting to split that into 2 lots. Each lot would have frontage on a street, so no deep lots are created from this application. Here it is in the zoning map. And here is the preliminary plat. As you can see, there is both lot 1 and lot 2. The existing house, which is on lot 2, will remain following the subdivision. And the minimum square footage for a lot in the R7.5 zone is 7,500 square feet, and these lots exceed that. Lot 1 is approximately 12,000 square feet, and lot 2 is approximately 15,000 square feet. And here it is with the final plat that doesn't show the house. And here are the street views from 1450 South as well as 1400 South. And staff recommends the Planning Commission approve Lukey subdivision, Plat A, located generally at 875 East, 1450 South in the R7.5 zone.
Thank you. Is the applicant here? Would they like to say anything? Add anything? Okay, thank you. All right. Anyone like to make a motion on this? Any further discussion?
I make a motion that the planning commission approve the Lukey subdivision, Plat A, generally located at 875 East, 1450 South in the R7.5 zone.
Second.
All right.
Aye.
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 All right, motion passes. Thanks. Okay, item 4.1, meeting minute approval. Everyone's had a chance to review those. Okay. Don't make the motion. Somebody like to make a motion?
To approve the minutes
I
from
second
July
it.
19, 2023.
Okay. Jerry?
Seconded.
Aye.
Sorry, voting? Sorry, I didn't hear.
Vote.
Vote on the meeting minutes?
He said aye.
Okay. Aye.
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 Abstain. I haven't read them.
Okay. And Ryan's not here. Is there anything from the city that needs to be said? Jason, is there anything? Are we good? Okay. Then
I'll
Motion
move
for
to
adj-
close the meeting.
Second.
Okay.
Aye.
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 Meeting adjourned.
Shortest meeting ever right there. I think that is a record. Was it 5 minutes? I think it is.
Can we go back and have another meeting? Go back.
Thank you.
Fast meeting, that's not a lot.